Dem Schism. The 2020 races heat up amid questions about the Democratic Party's capability to unite or build a coalition in the wake of failure in the Iowa primary to yield a meaningful winner. The party has been in tatters ever since the primary races show a candidate rather unfavorable to the Democratic establishment.
So these results really show how deeply divided this race is becoming between progressives and moderates. And Democrats are now issuing the warning to some of these candidates that they have to start building each other up or risk dividing the Democratic Party even further before November 2020.
On the heels of the rise of Bernie Sanders in the primaries, including the one in New Hampshire, liberals need to make a key decision given his socialist background. Sanders also ran in the 2016 presidential election, but the party failed to nominate him.
We've certainly seen, and this goes back to 2016, a great fear of a Bernie Sanders candidacy. A lot of the media seems to be sort of stepping around Bernie Sanders. I noticed listening to some of the coverage of the New Hampshire primary and also the debate that took place in New Hampshire that they often didn't even mention his name when they were talking about the various candidates. So I think there's definitely fear both in terms of the establishment organizations and also the Democratic Party itself. Now, that being said, he's got huge crowds of supporters at all of his rallies, and so it almost seems like there's a public swelling in favor of his campaign.
The Vermont senator had to suspend his 2016 campaign in favor of the Democratic nominee, Hillary Clinton, who was perceived by many voters as unfavorable and at times corrupt, given her record as a New York senator, the First Lady, and Secretary of State.
There is a reason why these people are putting huge amounts of money into our political system. And in my view, it is undermining American democracy, and it is allowing Congress to represent wealthy campaign contributors and not the working families of this country.
Well, Senator, I don't think you could find any person in political life today who has been subjected to more attacks and had more money spent against her by special interests, among whom you have named a few, than I.
Her nomination opened a crack in the party, giving the chance to the populist Republican contender Donald Trump to win the ball, despite spending much less money than his rival. But this time, Sanders is coming again, and his campaign appears to be on the rise once more.
Well, I'm skeptical about the Democrats' ability to create a coalition. There's been so much anger and intrigue and conniving against Bernie Sanders. You have to understand that in our country, the Democratic Party is not traditionally the party of the left. It's really more of a centrist, sort of center left. People like Hillary Clinton, James Carville, Bill Clinton. These people are not change agents. They're not spiritual. They are people that are very pragmatic and commercial.
Sanders is an independent candidate running as a Democrat, making him both an appeal to the party and as a danger. A senator from Vermont since 2007, the American politician has stuck to his viewpoints rather steadily during his career. His success has started to frighten establishment Democrats who are concerned that the socialism label he carries could remain a potent pejorative among the swing voters. The socialist label has already become a part and parcel of the Trump 2020 campaign's attacks. No surprise that the president even devoted an entire section of his State of the Union address to caution against the rise of socialism in America.
Let's remember he's a democratic socialist. I think if we don't qualify that, then people can, get scared of the word socialism, and there really doesn't need to be any fear here. This is not the old atheistic communism that we all grew up, you and I grew up with in the Cold War, right? This is more of a inclusive, democratic socialism that's open to interfaith awareness, something I know you and I are interested in as spiritual people.
This is while the Democrats' races have entered a contentious phase, with candidates attacking each other personally, giving Trump the upper hand in boosting his campaign. Trump has proven to be a master of employing schism in the opposing party to his benefit.
The Iowa caucus is the Trump campaign really making a concerted effort to sort of cast doubt onto the results of the caucus. They are spinning up potential conspiracy theories. They are really trying to cast questions over whether the outcome will be correctly, the results will be correctly counted.
Iowa and New Hampshire primaries have so far shown that Sanders' identity as a democratic socialist has lost its sting, and the caucuses still tend to vote for his ideas and plans as the U.S. president. Top Democrats are therefore warning primary voters that Sanders could not only fail to defeat Trump, but he may also undermine the party's chances in premier House, Senate, and governor's races.
The prize that a lot of candidates are anticipating contesting for is what we call Super Tuesday, the day in March when so many different states hold their primaries. And I think we're definitely going to see more and more contentiousness within the Democratic Party. People, the various candidates' campaigns will start attacking each other in ways that they have not done yet. And I don't think that's a good thing for democracy.
Pete Buttigieg is himself another problem. After winning most delegates in Iowa, 13, the South Bend, Indiana mayor has become a major target for other candidates, including former Vice President Joe Biden, who used to be the frontrunner, but his campaign is now on the decline.
Barack Obama called Joe Biden
best vice president America's ever had.
But Pete Buttigieg doesn't think much of the vice president's record. Let's compare. When President Obama called on him, Joe Biden helped lead the passage of the Affordable Care Act, which gave health care to 20 million people. And when parkgoers called on Pete Buttigieg, he installed decorative lights under bridges, giving citizens of South Bend colorfully illuminated rivers.
Democrats are facing a historic moment, wondering whether to stick to Sanders or even a Sanders-Buttigieg possible alliance, or to stick to Amy Klobuchar, a senator from Minnesota with centrist views. They might even be considering adding Senator Elizabeth Warren to her campaign in order to attract far-left voters. Klobuchar and Warren trailed Sanders and Buttigieg in the New Hampshire primary, strengthening the scenario.
I also want us to be honest with ourselves as Democrats. We might be headed for another one of those long primary fights that lasts for months. We're 2 states in, with 55 states and territories to go. We still have 98% of our delegates for our nomination up for grabs, and Americans in every part of the country are going to make their voices heard.
But Democrats could also keep cool about the Sanders-Buttigieg rise and allow voters' opinions to develop naturally. Meanwhile, the chances of Trump's re-election are apparently strengthening.
My hope is that the party will unify and that it'll become clear that the people have spoken and that there's no possibility to resist the nomination of Bernie Sanders when he simply has the votes. You know, he won or he tied in Iowa. Maybe he won, but it looks like he tied in Iowa. And he definitely won yesterday in New Hampshire. Pete Buttigieg is underqualified. He's 38 years old. He's only been the mayor of a small city briefly. I don't think it's Pete's year. I don't think this is his year, but this is definitely Bernie's year. So the question of unity, we can hope, we can work for unity.
President Trump is meanwhile acting triumphantly, taking the most advantage on the heels of his impeachment acquittal by employing the victorious moment in order to further cause division among Democratic contenders. He's also consolidating his grip on power at the White House by taking revenge on those collaborating to bring charges of abuse of power and obstruction of Congress against him.
It's a celebration because we have something that just worked out.
A celebration, perhaps, but also an airing of grievances.
We were treated unbelievably unfairly, and you have to understand, we first went through Russia. It was all
Apart from attacking and undermining figures such as House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Senators Chuck Schumer and Jerry Nadler, he's also fired some of those giving damning testimony against him, such as Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman and Ambassador Gordon Sondland.
Definitely, the president is using this as a vindication of his actions and his tactics. But I think that, we'll have to wait and see if there's more questioning of that by particularly Democrats in the House of Representatives, because they do still have the power to subpoena other witnesses and conduct other investigations.
The president is also attempting to appeal to the black voters to win the ball by flipping the traditionally Democratic supporters in the African American communities, particularly in swing states. Trump has a history of speech and actions that have widely been viewed as racist or racially charged, but he's adopted a new approach to win the African American support, one also highly blatant in his State of the Union speech.
4 more years to President Trump. Yay!
Come on down to The Price is Right and get your $300, April.
We're going to eat. We're going to eat. We're going to celebrate. Thank y'all so much. I really appreciate this from the bottom of my heart.
Was it condescending or insulting for us to give you this money?
Oh, I appreciate this. I appreciate this. I do.
The president is ramping up outreach to African Americans by citing the fact that black unemployment has reached a record low during the Trump administration, 5.9% in May 2018, currently standing at 6%. He's also stepping up attacks against former New York Mayor Mike Bloomberg over his support for the so-called stop-and-frisk policing tactic, mostly targeting African Americans and Latinos. So how can the Democratic contenders appeal to more demographics in America?
And I think that the candidates really do need to understand what it means to listen, not just show up and give your standard stump speech, but actually talk to all of the various communities around the country about what are their issues, what do people really feel needs to be addressed in Washington. And unfortunately, the candidates that have been in this race so far seem to be more focused on delivering their standard campaign speeches wherever we go. We'll see how that changes as they begin to move out into other parts of the country that are less homogenous than Iowa or New Hampshire.
With the November election on the horizon, Democrats are struggling to rally up support among Americans to make sure they can prevent Trump from getting re-elected. So far, many demographics are seeing no candidate favorable enough. Currently, the Democrats' best chances are all white, including 2 women. Considering the lineup so far, the Liberals' chances of sending a ruler of their own to the White House appear to be slimming.
A very important question how the very, very white field of Democratic candidates is going to reach out to people of color in the United States. Joe Biden, who has claimed the most support in the African American community, spoke yesterday in South Carolina, and he was talking about listening to what the African American voters in South Carolina have to say. But then almost immediately he turned around and started telling them what they should support. And I think that the candidates really do need to understand what it means to listen, not just show up.
Raising the nuclear war risk. The United States deploys a new type of low-yield nuclear warhead aboard some ballistic missile submarines, basically raising the risk of a nuclear war. The W-76-2's danger lies in its relatively small yield of perhaps 5 kilotons, which makes it a more practical nuke with a higher chance of actually being used in this era.
The United States has introduced a new, less destructive nuclear warhead to its submarine arsenal, marking a landmark development that some are warning could push the U.S. closer to nuclear war on a global scale. RT's Rachel Blevins is joining us live from the newsroom with the latest details to this. So, Rachel, why is the U.S. doing this?
Well, Manila, the U.S. has deployed its first low-yield nuclear warhead, and while the Pentagon claims it will keep Americans safe by making the breakout of nuclear war less likely, critics are warning it could actually do the opposite. Now, the new weapon has been deployed to an unknown location in the Atlantic Ocean on the USS Tennessee. The battleship typically carries multiple D-5 submarine-launched missiles, such as the W-88 warhead, which has an explosive yield of 455 kilotons, and the W-76, which has an explosive yield of 90 kilotons. The new W-76-2 is a modified version that is believed to be around just 5 kilotons.
The measure follows Trump's attempts to produce smaller nukes, which his administration has outlined in the Nuclear Posture Review. The Trump administration has claimed that the move is in response to Russia's alleged preparation to use small nukes.
This is about a half to a third of the kilotonnage of what was the U.S. dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima in World War II. And the idea behind these is use as a tactical nuclear weapon with a military strategy, a nuclear strategy of to escalate, to de-escalate conflicts. And this is only the latest step that the U.S. is taking to lower its nuclear threshold for use.
The Pentagon has refused to either deny or acknowledge the latest measure officially, but the American military's deployment of new nukes with a reduced destructive power has caused grave concerns not only in Russia and China, but also for the United States allies in Europe.
Here we have not just a momentous occasion, but a weapon which is intended explicitly to be more usable, and not just more usable against Russia and China, but to be more usable against Iran and North Korea as well. It seemed to me that looking more deeply at this weapon, looking more deeply at the doctrines behind it, and then really what surprised me in my reporting, looking more at Donald Trump and the role that he might play in the future, was a story that was just as important, if not more important, than what was going on in the political world.
Moscow, for its part, has voiced alarm over the new addition to the U.S. nuclear arsenal amid fears of an arms race, also involving not just Washington, but also Beijing. European leaders are also worried that long-standing accords on limiting the growth of nuclear arsenals appear to be increasingly at risk. Europe, in part, needs to ensure that it does not find itself in the middle of a Cold War-style standoff.
The EU is essentially a number of client states to the U.S., so they don't really factor into the situation here. But when considering states such as Russia and China, which the U.S. terms, adversaries and peer competitors, the usual response to such a lowering of thresholds is a tit for tat, a quid pro quo. Russia and China have not taken that step at all so far, and I think that is the extremely wise thing to do, because the threat of any type of military conflict now spiraling and escalating very quickly into an all-out nuclear conflict and war is so low that they simply don't want to add to it to any extent.
The president's spending proposal also requests money for a new arms race with Russia and China, restoring nuclear weapons as central to military policy. Trump's $4.8 trillion budget for 2021 shows that the administration is seeking to boost the federal government's production of plutonium pits for nuclear weapons by billions of dollars.
You want endless wars, dirty air, and you think that the poor and hungry in America are getting too good of a deal. This is a budget for you. That's exactly what this budget is about. Donald Trump, in his inaugural address, said he would be the champion of the forgotten man. Everything he did would be about the forgotten man. Well, he forgot about the forgotten man the minute he walked off the dais. In this budget, he proposes not only all this additional money for nuclear weapons and for the border wall, but he wants to cut the Environmental Protection Agency's budget by more than a fourth.
The administration has proposed a 19% increase to $19.8 billion for the National Nuclear Security Administration, involving plans to produce yet another new submarine-launched nuclear warhead named the W-93.
It's quite clear what path the U.S. Nuclear and military industrial complex is heading. This has already been laid out in plans by the military, issued to by the Trump administration, and reported on extensively by the Congressional Budget Office. They are on a path to not only maintain, but to modernize, upgrade, and expand its nuclear strategic and nuclear tactical weapon forces at a cost to the U.S. taxpayer of $1.2 trillion. $1.2 trillion.
The U.S. appetite for nukes reveals its double policy, involving maximum pressure on Iran over baseless allegations that Tehran seeks development of nuclear weapons. This is while Tehran maintains that it is not seeking nukes, and its nuclear program is solely for peaceful purposes.
This is a double standard. There's no question there. A double standard is actually explicitly built into the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, at least the way it has been implemented, because all of the nuclear powers are not reducing their nuclear arsenal. In fact, they're modernizing and expanding it, certainly particularly in the U.S.'s case. Countries that do not have nuclear arsenals, such as Iran, the U.S. is now taking it a step further.
Iran has even clinched a nuclear deal, dubbed the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action with world powers, which demonstrated the Islamic Republic's peaceful approach in its nuclear program. But Trump just quit the deal and started accusing Iran of being after nuclear bombs, an idea also severely trumpeted by Israel. The US proclivity for nukes is yet another example for the superpower's insane militarization of the world.